The Christian Economist explains Lesson 10, Supply and Demand. The figure you're looking at now is a two-dimensional graph that all economists use. But here's how you get your grounding. See, in my generation, there was something called PDQ, which meant pretty darn quick. Well, it's just an easy way of remembering the three letters. Every time you see a two-dimensional graph in economics, think PDQ. Top left to bottom right, price, demand, quantity. Of course, there's a supply in there, but I'm just trying to make it easy for you. So point number one is PDQ, price, demand, quantity. Changes in demand by price. Oh, this is a messy looking diagram, isn't it? But it's purposeful, and in a few minutes I'll explain why. Look way to the left side. I teach this in the classroom by asking a student what would be his round-trip ticket to his home of Albuquerque. Well, we're at Dallas Baptist University. So he says to me, about $250. We call that the equilibrium price. And I put on the diagram that if it's $250, maybe he'll go home and see his mother 4 times. If the price goes up, what happens? He'll go home less. In this diagram, perhaps 3. If it goes up again, perhaps 2. What if the price goes down? If the price goes down, he'll buy more tickets. Doesn't this just make sense? And that's how you follow the demand curve, up or down. We do have a phrase in economics, though. We say the demand curve goes down. But simply what it means is the cheaper the item is, the more you're going to buy. Isn't this just common sense? You know, so much of economics is just common sense. But once you learn this two-dimensional diagram, it becomes very powerful, and we'll do that in later sessions. Change in supply by price. Now look at this messy diagram at the bottom left. If my student is buying round-trip tickets from Dallas to Albuquerque, they're being supplied by the airlines. They think the opposite of him. They're thinking, if we can get this student to pay $300 instead of $200, we'd like to supply more of those. But if the price gets bid down to $200, they're less interested. And here's an interesting way to remember this. See that line going from bottom left to top right? It's the supply curve. And do you know why? Because it just happens in English. The word up is in the middle of supply. So you always know the supply curve goes up. And what that means is suppliers are more interested in supplying products at higher prices, less interested at lower prices. What do we call the middle point? The equal point. But since it's economics, we have a big term for it. It's the equilibrium point. Changes in demand by spite. What is spite? It's an acronym I made up to help you remember it. Look at this diagram. See, in the last 2 points, we've been talking about movements along the line. Now we're talking about an entire movement of the line. 5 things can move the demand curve. The demand curve itself will move left or right based on these 5 things, and the first one is price of substitutes. We've been talking about my student who lives in Albuquerque. I suppose he could ride the bus, but not a very good substitute. I suppose he could drive, something of a substitute. The second, the letter P, stands for population. Well, my student is taking classes at Dallas Baptist University. With 7 million people in the Dallas metro area, it's the 4th largest metro area in the United States. I didn't say city, metro area. So it's served by a lot of airlines. But he's flying to a relatively small city, Albuquerque. So there are fewer demand there. The I stands for income. Well, if people make more income, they'll fly more, and the curve will move right. If they make less income, the curve will move left. The 4th letter is T for taste. Now, you usually think of taste as something you do with your mouth, don't you? Some of us like Dr. Pepper, some of us like Coke, some of us like Pepsi. That's taste. But in economics, taste means, do you have a taste for Southwest Airlines or do you have a taste for American Airlines? So as the taste for air travel gets more demand, that demand curve moves to the right. As there's less taste, it moves to the left. And the last one is the only one that gets repeated between demand on the top of the diagram and supply at the bottom, and that's expectations. So if my student expects that prices will go up, he'll buy a ticket now. If he expects that prices are going to go down, he'll buy it later. Changes in supply by site. What's site? Again, another acronym to help you remember which 4 things move the entire supply curve. The first one starts with S. It is the number of sellers in the market. Well, if there's more airlines, that will move to the right and prices will get cheaper. As there are fewer airlines, that supply curve moves to the left and flights become more expensive. The second one is the I. That's the input price. Well, how much does it cost the airlines for labor, for fuel, for the aircraft, for the landing rights, for taxes? Those things will move that curve either left or right. As the input prices go up, the curve moves to the left and flights become more expensive. As the input prices go down, the supply curve moves to the right and flights get cheaper. The T stands for technology. You live in one of the best times in history. Technology just gets better and better and better. Airfares get cheaper and cheaper, and it gets safer and safer. Why? Because improvements in technology. So in your lifetime, and probably for the rest of your life, technology will continue to get better. This moves the supply curve to the right, lowering the price of airfares in our example here. E, again, is the only one that gets repeated between demand and supply. It's expectation. So if suppliers expect there will be more flyers, that curve will move to the right. If they expect there will be fewer flyers, the supply will move to the left. In Romans 11:34, it asks the question, who knows the mind of God? See, that's what you should be thinking when you're looking at that diagram. Think about that. 2 changes in prices, 5 changes in demand, 4 changes in supply. Who knows? Who knows what the price is going to be today? Like when I was teaching this just the other day. Class starts at 8. Stock market opened at 8:30. So we turned on at 8:32 and I asked a student, where do you think the stock market's going today? Do you see what he's trying to predict? He's trying to predict 11 things at the same time. Now the student said up. When I said why, he said, I just hope. Yeah, good luck with that. Who knows the mind of God? Who knows the mind of the market? Who can determine 11 things all moving at the same time? Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Fed, doesn't have a computer strong enough. Janet Yellen, Treasury Secretary, her computer can't determine this. Nobody can. That's the fascinating thing about the market. Nobody knows where it's going to go. Who determines it? All of us, as I said in a previous lesson, by voting. Every time somebody buys an airline ticket, that's a vote. Every time an airline offers a flight, that's a vote. Where's it going to go? Nobody knows the mind of God, and nobody knows where the market's going to go. God's providence. Okay, so in an environment with fallen people, and in which nobody knows where the market's going to go, how do we serve our neighbor? Because as Christians, we are commanded to love our neighbor as we love ourselves. We are commanded to care for the poor and to serve one another. How do we do this? Look, before Sergei Sadamatov and I wrote the book Biblical Economic Policy, I read 35 books on the topic of Christian economics. In my very subjective opinion, the best one was called Money, Greed, and God by Jay Richards. Highly recommend this book. If I think that's the best book, I'm going to give you what I think is the best line from the best book. And it answers this question we've been talking about today between supply and demand. Who determines this? Who creates it? Just a moment ago, I said, maybe God, because nobody else knows. Here's what Jay Richards says toward the end of his book, Money, Greed, and God. The free market is a stunning example of how God can work all things together for good, even in a fallen world. That's the best definition I've heard of the market. It is God's providence, so that even in a fallen world, we can serve one another. Lesson 10, Supply and Demand. I'm Dave Arnott, the Christian Economist. Fear God, tell the truth, earn a profit. See you next time. For more information, please visit us online at davearnott.com. If you have questions or suggestions for future podcasts, please submit them online or in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.